Hello, and welcome to the inaugural episode of this podcast. And thank you for being here with me. My name is Eden Hare, and I will be your hostess. In this episode, I want to introduce myself and what I would like to accomplish with this podcast. Knowing a little bit about me will help explain how and where some of the examples in the episodes arise from, and why I think I have a perspective to share. Seriously, though, I want to cover a lot of different topics. While we're going to look at them through the transgender lens, many of them are not uniquely part of the transgender experience. I should also point out that some of these topics are going to be emotionally sensitive, and I'm going to apologize now, as many will not be very politically correct in some cases. That doesn't mean rude, it just means that sometimes we need to discuss topics which some may want to avoid. Avoiding these sensitive topics is, in my opinion, the root of many issues that we are faced with today. While I'm trying to give you an explanation and promote discussion about these topics, I want to point out that I am not a psychologist, psychiatrist, or therapist, and I won't make any claims to be. Therefore, please do not use this podcast as a substitute for good therapy. My goal is to be informative and possibly even provide ideas for you to talk about with your therapist. In a future episode, I am going to talk about the value of therapy, at least from my perspective. I hope this podcast is informative, entertaining, and humorous. So, here goes. Welcome to my life. Just like everyone else, I have my good days and I have my bad. I have some brains and I know how to use them, despite the incessant blonde jokes. I have a sense of humor, and I know my way around a lot of different things. I'm a woman. Well, you might have guessed that, but that hasn't always been the case. Wait, don't you dare stop this podcast thinking it is just another podcast about some transgender chick. It isn't. This podcast is not just about my journey to my authentic self. It is about hope, sharing, caring, and what I have learned thus far. My goal is not to just help my transgender listeners, but those who we hope will support us. Our families, friends, work colleagues, because for them, they are also experiencing their own transition. Their part in our transition is different and just as important. For me, this whole journey started somewhere during the Jurassic period. Not the Jurassic period, but that time between being a child and an adult, which most people refer to as puberty and many later call hell. No, I am not going to bore you with all of that until or unless there is a reason to. Instead, I am going to jump way ahead to the more recent history, which is where all the really good stuff happens for me. Then I'll likely have to go back in time using the Wayback Machine for anyone who has ever listened to the Stuff You Should Know podcasts. Oh, well, perhaps I should tell you a little bit about me, so you have a little bit more of a frame of reference than when I started writing and recording this. As I said, my name is Eden. It hasn't always been Eden, but that is a topic for another episode. You want to actually know my age? It's rude to ask a lady her age. Okay, I'll tell you. As of the time of this recording, I'm 60. I have a sister. She's younger than me. A mom and dad. They are both older than me. And I have a ton of cousins. Almost all, well, I guess maybe all of them, younger than me. I have lived in a lot of places the first few years of my life, but really only one home. I grew up in Canada and moved to the United States in the early 2000s. I live in Texas for now, which is fine because I haven't always lived here. As I mentioned, I identify as a woman. Clinically, I am a transgender woman. That means someone decided when I was born that since I had boy parts, I had to be a boy. I guess that was okay with me for a while, but we'll come back to that later at some point. Just like the moldy cheese that is in the back of your refrigerator. I have 4 university degrees, including a master's in instructional design and in adult education. I spent 36 years working in the information technology industry for small, medium, and global companies. And I have been writing professionally since 1992 on a lot of different subjects. Information security, various technology subjects, learning theories, and more. Many of those publications use my birth name, or what I affectionately call today my pen name. So I said I was going to have to back up a bit. Well, here's the first one. As I mentioned, I grew up in Canada, specifically Ottawa, the nation's capital. I went to school there, got married, and divorced there. Twice. I adopted my second wife's 2 children, and I lived a masculine existence. Like many transgender people, things were just not right. I hated to describe myself as a man. I hated to talk about my body. And I had no language to describe what I felt. I just knew I felt different. That difference manifested itself as someone who appeared shy. I felt I had a lack of confidence. I was afraid of being rejected, unpopular. I am musically inclined, which created a venue for me, but I had trouble with the associated praise. You see, I didn't do anything special. I wasn't special. In the 1970s and 1980s, there was no internet, so finding information meant either asking questions to someone or spending a lot of time in a library reading reference books, which may or may not help. Even today, there are people who think being transgender means that you're gay. This is not the case at all. But in the 1980s, being gay, or even being thought of as gay, meant that you were likely a target for some verbal or even physical abuse. That made asking for help difficult, terrifying. As I got older, I still had no language to describe how I felt. Like many transgender people, I experimented with my gender expression. In my case, wearing women's clothing in a private setting and feeling comfortable with it, happy about it. So I got married and then divorced. And then got married again and divorced again. You see, I didn't know what it meant when someone said you need to love yourself, and you need to love yourself before you can love someone else. I knew that people were proud of me, but I didn't understand why. I felt their pride in me was tied to the things that I did. I didn't feel smart. I did not feel capable. I did feel different. And then later, I started to learn the language to describe me, to become aware of what it was to be different, what felt right, and what didn't. And this is where this podcast series begins. Let's start with the language, the meanings, both medical, psychological, and cultural. As part of this series, I'll be talking about my experience and aspects of my journey, and possibly some other people along the way. Thank you for being with me today and participating in my journey. And I hope that you are as excited about I am about what comes next. Until then, you have an absolutely awesome day.